they don't know it, but they're actually speaking an ancient Etruscan religious concept of very sacred big time cycle observance piety, to put it into an English phrase. That's what secular means. It means that because time is so vast, we're so small, life is so short, the cosmos is so extraordinary, and there are so many extraordinary gods out there, we should be pious, humble, kind, and loving to each other. That's what secular means. And that's why the Indians have a secular constitution. And so does many other countries in the world. France does. And some of the French revolutionaries knew what I'm talking about. Knew Pompeius was the kind of talk of the cafes in 1788 in Paris. And they wanted to model their new republic on that virtue, really. So this secular games are very interesting. And guess what? This is where I'm excited. When they were performed every 100 years, so it would only come once in your lifetime, right, if you're lucky. Specifically, heralds would go around all the countryside, all Rome, saying, come to the festival, come to the games, assemble. Special objects would be brought out in the temple at the both on the Capitol Hill and on the Palatine. Objects would be brought for purification. Also torches, sulphur, asphalt. Everyone would be gathered together. And what it was for was there would be 2 days for purification, and this was to cure pandemics, right? These secular games, miraculously, if there was plague in Rome, it would go. These had huge healing powers, these secular games. And so the pandemics were treated in this way, says Zosimus, who was a later Byzantine commentator on all this. So, the Romans knew that health and metaphysical health and piety, to use the Roman word, go together. If we're truthful people, if we're honest, kind, if we don't stick our necks on people that have been, had the misfortune to, pass a dud bill, this person is not pious, the guy that killed that bloke. That's what's wrong with America. It needs purification. It needs secular games. It needs to get rid of this, exorcise these demons, these Steve Bannon types, who are in danger of destroying that country from within. And therefore it's very important. These games took place exactly now, the purification rituals and so on. And they were dedicated, the first night was tonight, May the 31st, dedicated to Proserpina, Juno, Latona, Diana, the Morai, and Mother Earth, Terra Mater. Well, I think bring back the secular games, folks. We've got this pandemic on the planet. It'd be nice to see them revived, really. Only every 100 years, mind. So quite how we do that. I mean, the Olympic Games are great, but they come round too often, and they're obviously not curing the pandemics. I think we need a secular games. Let's take that on as a project, people. Right. Now I want to move on to my next little topic, and this is something else I've discovered since we last spoke, which I'm extremely excited about. I've discovered the work of this amazing Israeli archaeologist, Simcha Yakubovitsi, who is he's like the naked archaeologist. He's going around discovering stuff that, on the frontiers of scholarship and sleuthing. And his documentary on Exodus is the most convincing presentation I've yet seen about situating Moses in history. I've struggled with Moses ever since I read, the Bible properly in depth in my early 20s in Canada when I studied the thing properly, apart from just little bits at school, but we were never taught it properly. When I went back and read it, the question then arises, having done a lot of classical history and all the rest of it, like, where's Moses? Why isn't he mentioned in the Egyptian Chronicles? That has always perplexed me. And, Egypt was a country that liked order, it liked truth, it was ruled by Mars. Surely this event, if it was anywhere near as described in Exodus, it would have been recorded. Well, what old Jakubowiczi's done, incredibly, it seems to me quite convincing, is he's relocated the time span of Moses from, we were all taught he was around at the time of Ramses II in about 1250 BC, but there's no record of any kind of Moses-type activity happening in Egypt at that time. Now, I know that David Rohl wants to move him even closer towards us, and he thinks that solves it, but I'm not convinced by Rohl's work. Much as I like him as a person, he's got his PhD from University College, where I used to kind of partly study and teach, and he's a great guy. I would love to chair a debate between David Rohl and Shimcha Jakubowicz, and I'm not sure who would win, but my money's on Shimcha, actually. Because what he's discovered is if you push Moses back further into the past, you go the other way to about 1550 BC, you come to the time of Ahmose I, who was a pharaoh ruling Egypt at the time. And it all suddenly fits into place. Now, I can only summarise what this documentary says. Watch it yourself. I'm only going to summarise a tiny bit of it. But to me, the crucial bit is, the thing I get very excited about, is that Ahmose was famous in Egyptian history for throwing out the Hyksos, who were the Asiatic Semitic invaders of Egypt. And so in the stories of Ahmose's heroic deeds, his work is told from the Egyptian point of view. Exodus, the Bible, tells it all from the Israelite or Hyksos point of view, which, of course, according to them, they're the good people and the Egyptians are evil. Well, the Egyptian story is the other way round. Egyptians are good, those Hyksos are evil, so we kick them out. And, like all conflicts, there's some truth on both sides, no doubt. What's exciting and interesting about the discoveries is that it totally fits the chronology. So I do strongly recommend people to watch that documentary. It gets even better. And so, the next thing that I got very excited about is the following. Firstly, the name Ahmose is related to Moses. Ahmose has a son called Mose. It's a name in the air. I mean, anyone with any sense is calling their kids Mose. And according to the Bible, let's accept it as, probably factual, come down. Moses, our Moses, was brought up at the court of Ahmose I. In other words, he was trained and he was given the name, very possibly by the daughter of Pharaoh. Let's just say that's all true, and therefore he's brought up in the inner sanctum of the Pharaoh. And they don't realise he's a Hyksos, they think he's Egyptian. Now, he's taught and trained in the priesthood. He's taught the higher learning. Now, who's the great god at that time? The great god of Egypt at that time, as well as all the other ones, was a god called Yahweh. YHW. Transliterated in Egyptian, and he was the moon god of Egypt at the time, and Ahmose was his special devotee because his name Ahmose is actually Yahmose. He was dedicated to Yahweh, the moon god. Well, I kind of fall off my chair when I discover this, and it's not in Jakubowiczi's film. He doesn't go into this. We can have a chat about this sometimes. But what fell into place, because I'm an expert in comparative religion, when I accepted Shimcha's new chronology and I put Moses back to 1500 BC, bring him up at the court of Ahmose and get him trained in Yahweh, the moon god, it to me is absolutely obvious, because I always wanted to know where Yahweh comes from, what we call Yahweh or Jehovah. This amazing God that suddenly bursts into history with Moses. He's not mentioned before Moses. Suddenly it's all Yahweh, right? Well, I think this explains it. I think that Shimka, incredibly, has found this out. This should be on every single billboard, every single news station. This is #1 news. This is even more important than race riots in America. Yahweh's been found. This is just amazing. So it turns out Yahweh, is the moon god of the wisdom of the quintessence of the Egyptian Hermetic mysteries. And later, generations later, he was rebranded and called Khonsu. And then after that, later he was called Thoth. Well, Thoth was the name that I've always, revered. And then later the Greeks said, well, Thoth, yeah, okay, that's Hermes. And that's where the entire Hermetic literature comes from, which I've been in love with ever since I discovered it. Working on an impossible to complete commentary on the Hermetic texts and studying, the great Cardinal Egidio and all the great Hermetic teachers of the schools of Florence and so on that influenced John Dee, and the entire European Hermetic Renaissance took off that Dame Frances Yates talks about. Well, hang on, that's all Thoth, so that's all Khonsu, so that's all Yahweh, actually. And that's what they all said. They all said that the God of the Hebrews and the God of the Egyptians and the God of the Christians is all the same God. Well, if it's actually Yahweh, the moon god, to me that explains the incredible attention to detail of Hebrew and Israeli thinkers and scholars. Their amazing Kabbalistic, attention to every letter of the Torah, every little shape of every letter that Moses tells the story of Moses, of Genesis, Exodus, and so on. The Torah, the first 5 books, are poured over by them with incredible attention. Well, that's what Thoth priests do, because Thoth invented writing. So obviously Moses taught writing as the great mystery of Yahweh. And it was just around then the alphabet was being invented. And so the 10 Commandments, the reason I stumbled across all this and put it all together is because I was researching the 10 Commandments for my Peace Declarations book, because it's in there as an early peace declaration. The 10 Commandments are one of the earliest texts which say thou shalt not kill. It's there. They are a peace declaration. And so, the link to Yahweh and Ahmose's time, I think, is pretty circumstantially pretty convincing. And you can read my book when it's published. I think, it is published, that one. And you can see the details. But, I'm a scholar, I suspend judgment. I'm just sharing this with you because I think it's exciting. And I think that chap, Shimka, deserves incredible thanks from the scholarly community. I also just want to share something else I've been up to, which is my daughter in Brighton and Sussex. They're involved with a little group of pagans who celebrate the moon, strangely enough. So here we have the moon god Yahweh may well be underlying the mysteries of the Semitic peoples, who we know as the Israelis, and in turn influencing the group that become the Christians, and later the Muslims, because the Muslims use the moon for their calendar. And the Christians also, the moon is very important for the cycles of time. The moon is incredibly important. And this group of pagans in Brighton were doing some ceremonies online. It's all on Zoom, which I had the pleasure to participate in a few of those. And thank you very much to my daughter Sophie for inviting me, and her friends that made it all possible. Sophie did the ritual on the moon, and each one is a phase of the moon. So the, whether it's the full moon, the waning moon, the dark moon, or the waxing, rising moon. And we ended last night with the waxing moon, which was, again, beautifully done. I got a word. We were asked to go off and find a word and have a sort of guided meditation. I got a new word, which I want to share with you, which I didn't have time to share with the group last night. I think it's sweet, and this came to me because it was St. Joan of Arc's day. And in my guided meditation, I was taken to see Joan of Arc, who's one of my heroines. She was a great, extraordinary woman. She's the patron saint of France. She was a heroic woman, and she stood up against the English, who were being beastly, doing their beastly thing. You know, the English have this beastly quality, and even though I'm English, I know, you know, there's a ghastliness about English brutes who are impervious to the subtleties of knowledge. I know because I've taught them for years. And some English really are like, they'll chop your head off before they'll listen to anything. And those are the types that were invading France at the time. Getting drunk, you know, smashing up villagers, raping the peasant girls, just really being brutes. And poor old Joan of Arc, she was only 13 at the time. She got this download of voices telling her to do something about this. St. Michael, I think, was the first that contacted her, and other saints. And she was a pious girl, like a lot of amazing French girls. She's now the patron saint of France. And she was told she had to organise a resistance movement, which is, I mean, just think about it. You know, the English were running most of northern France at the time, had huge armies, they were brutes. And this little simple girl in a village, hearing voices, had the faith to be able to organise a resistance. And she got an interview with the Dauphin, and he was convinced of her clairvoyant ability. She obviously had some psychic powers. She was a spiritually charged person. And she managed to lead and galvanise the French to recapture important places. Mostly important was Orléans, which is a city not far from me. I love it. And all that was done through faith, on a wing and a prayer. Well, that's how saints operate, you know. And so she became the patron saint of France, and deservedly so. We need new Joan of Arcs to arise, to have faith in their inner calling and their love of justice. So, yeah, a warrior saint. And so in the meditation, I was having a communion with her in the forest, and we were asked to get a word planted on an acorn, like a seed that we could plant. And I got this totally new word I'd not ever thought of, nobody's ever thought of it before. And it's peaceliness. Peaceliness. So it's an attitude of being where you embrace peacefulness, but it's not quite the same as peacefulness, because that's, I don't know, it's a bit abstract. Peaceliness is a sort of gravitas that one would have. Like if you're a Martin Luther King, or you're a true peace worker, a Deganoida or something. Peaceliness is something we should cultivate. It's a virtue. But it's a quality, it's a taste, it's a baraka, it's a transmission. And it comes from the divine. And I think it's when our souls reach a place of inner wholeness, which is, to me, what I call enlightenment. I think that's the general consensus. Today is also the day of the Buddhist saint Mahakashyapa in my sages of the day, and Mahakashyapa was regarded by Buddha as his greatest disciple, and he prophesied there would come a time when he would become a full-on Buddha in his own right, and the Buddha of the Radiant Land. And in the wonderful Lotus Sutra, which is a great text that's influenced Chinese and Japanese and now Western Buddhism, Mahakashyapa is predicted as, you know, his future enlightenment. Well, I think these texts refer to actual people and actual enlightenment experiences. And one of my duties as a transpersonal historian is that we should develop a historiography capable of describing these kinds of enlightenment experiences, you know, with all the work of transpersonal psychology since Esalen and Maslow and you know, all the greats of transpersonal psychology, starting with Jung and Sagioli. We've got to have a language to describe these kind of states of higher consciousness. And then we have to find a way of teaching it in the schools, in our universities, in our colleges, and living it, so we can all become Mahakashyapas, you know, and we can bring that, the Lotus Sutra's prediction of these marvellous future kingdoms, let's have them now. You know, that's the Shambhala kingdom that we need here and now, right? That's where I'm coming. I think that's where Alan Watts was coming from as well. So anyway, that's what peaceliness is. Mahakashyapa had that. So anyway, I thought I'd share that word. I think it's quite neat that I got it in a vision of Joan of Arc on her day, no less. Right, I'm going to finish now with a little poem. I've spoken enough prose, but I try and speak in poetry a little bit. These are two shorter poems from my sixth volume, written between 2013 and 2015, and little short ones. This one is, I rather like this poem. It's called Jacob Ponders His Next Move. I wanted to sit at the well. I wanted to join in and wonder. I wanted to say my mission. I had served 7 years, but it turned out it was for the wrong woman. We all know that one. I went to sit at the well. I wanted to say my mission. Okay, that's one little poem, but I think there's a lot in there. And then finally, another little poem called Invisible Chess. It's an invisible chess game with pieces in 4 dimensions. You cannot always see the adversary. You only know the moves when you clash and the sparks fly. If only we can move towards the glory of peace, then the game will finally become clear. Okay, there's the book. Right, Shalom, thank you so much for listening, and enjoy your week, and may the gods protect you.